Hey guys, I just watched the first and second episodes of X-Men 97. I also watched the last episode of the classic series for the 20th time. For those of you who, like me, follow the animated series through childhood, I can say that the episodes are incredible. But I want to know your thoughts too, so let me know in the comments if you've watched or plan to watch X-Men. In today's video, I'm going to break down the first episode and also give you a quick summary of what happened at the end of the original animated series, since X-Men 97 picks up exactly where it left off. Later, I'll do a separate video reviewing episode 2. For those who haven't seen the original X-Men animated series, don't worry, I'll bring you up to speed so you understand everything. Recapping the ending of the classic animated series and connecting it to the new one. First off, one thing that made me nostalgic right away was the opening. We have the same theme song and almost identical intro with slight changes in a few scenes, but each character's introduction is the same as the original series. However, we have two new additions, Morph and Bishop. Morph has a somewhat complicated history in the original series. He supposedly dies in the second episode, but ends up returning there, controlled by Mr. Sinister for a while. Eventually, he breaks free. Despite not considering himself ready to be an X-Men in the last episode, Graduation Day, Professor Xavier recognizes him as a team member before leaving. So we have Morph back on the team. Bishop, on the other hand, was not on the team at the end of the animated series. He is a time traveler that appears periodically in the history of the X-Men, so he's also part of the new team. After the introduction, we get into the episode. Professor Xavier used to refer to the team as my X-Men, and some of his last words before being taken at the end. The original episode of the series was to express how proud he was of his team. Now, this responsibility falls on Cyclops, who repeats the phrase in this first episode, as we also saw in the trailers. At the beginning of episode 1, we see the city and a large Stark Industries sign indicating the presence of Tony Stark, Iron Man. There are also references to Dasta, a wealthy mutants company that the X-Men save, and VistaCorp, a company linked to Ant-Man and other superhero stories. The following scenes show a poster calling for the denunciation of mutants and graffiti saying mutants are monsters, reflecting the conflict between humans and mutants that intensified at the end of the animated series. Although some humans support mutants, many see them as dangerous and advocate their elimination. Magneto, on the other hand, believes in mutant superiority and wants to dominate humans, while Professor Xavier fights for mutant rights, striving for safety and peaceful coexistence. At the end of the animated series, this fight didn't result in a positive outcome. The episode Graduation Day shows Professor Xavier being attacked and slipping into a coma, an event that was broadcast live. This caused many mutants to side with Magneto's viewpoint, who was ready to take the reins. However, some X-Men believed that Magneto could help in saving Professor Xavier. Cyclops, Jean, and Wolverine sought Magneto, who initially attacked them but was later convinced that Professor Xavier is dying. Using his powers, Magneto amplifies Professor Xavier's psychic abilities so that he can communicate with Lilandra, an alien with whom he shares a long history. Lilandra arrives and states that she can only save Professor Xavier under the care of her civilization, the Shi'ar. Magneto shows his love for Professor Xavier by amplifying his powers, even though he understands that it could cost him his own life. The professor briefly wakes up, comes down to Magneto and says goodbye to each of the X-Men present, including those who are now part of the team except for Bishop. His last words express pride in his team. Then Lilandro leads the way as the X-Men and Magneto watch her leave. So, Professor Xavier is not dead. He is under the care of Lilandra and the Shi'ar Empire. This leaves us wondering if we will ever see him again. I'm very eager for this. My bet is that we will see him at the end of the first season, since the second season is already confirmed. What do you guys think? Comment below. Before we continue, remember to subscribe to the channel and like the video to stay updated. Your likes and subscriptions contribute to the growth of the project. As the project grows, I can bring more interesting videos for you. Agreed? Thank you for the support. Let's continue. X-Men 97 episode 1. To me, my X-Men. Now returning to the episode, we see an abandoned shed where some people are bringing in a mutant with a collar that prevents him from using his powers. They do this to all captured mutants to neutralize their abilities. There are banners from the Friends of Humanity, an organization clearly against mutants. Something that stands out is when someone mentions an anonymous buyer willing to pay $10,000 for each mutant delivered. This shows that there is an active hunt for mutants. We find out that the young man captured is Roberto da Costa, known as Sunspot among the X-Men, a mutant of Brazilian origin capable of absorbing and channeling solar energy. He tries to negotiate, but the mercenaries make it clear that this is not about money. They want to eliminate all mutants. We realize that the relationship between humans and mutants is quite tense. The pickups feature sentry technology, probably provided by this mystery buyer. As one of them gets ready to showcase the tech, he feels the chill and hears thunder, signaling the storm is coming. She bursts onto the scene, demanding the release of the young man, but they disregard her and start to attack. At this point, Bishop shows up, absorbing all the energy shot towards him thanks to his mutant power. He realizes the attackers have been upgraded with sentinel blasters, so Cyclops storms the scene with stunning animations showing agility and precision in his attacks. At a certain point, one of the attackers uses a sentinel arm to restrain Cyclops and attempts to remove his visor, unaware his powers originate from his eyes. Cyclops cracks a joke about surrendering and then sets off a massive explosion. A newspaper headline flies across the scene, prominently featuring one from the Daily Bugle questioning if Spider-Man is a mutant. Another detail is a nod to the Hellfire Gala, a major mutant event with text by Ed Brock and photos by Peter Parker. Will the classic 90s animated series Spider-Man make a comeback? I'm certain of it. Back at the X-Mansion, we see Cyclops trying to lead and speaking to Gambit about the necessity of him being on the field. Rogue steps in to defend Gambit, emphasizing their relationship, a significant point in both the previous series and Marvel's storyline. The couple is known to eventually get married. Cyclops is determined to keep Professor X's dream alive and accepts this responsibility. Rogue brings up Morphe's pretense of being Professor Xavier on TV from the last episode of the prior series. Then Jean Grey shows up pregnant, emphasizing her relationship with Cyclops. They decide to speak with the young captive to determine where his kidnappers from the Friends of Mankind group got their Sentinels technology. We are introduced to Dr. Hank McCoy, the Beast, upside down, just as he was in the original series. Jubilee also comes into the picture, focusing on the bizarre new reality they confront, comparable first episode of the original animated series when he was rescued by the X-Men. They interrogate Roberto, who knows nothing about the sentry guns, and invite him to stay for safety. Roberto, skeptical about the situation, is placed in the danger room where he faces a simulation of Magneto that scares him until Wolverine appears, adding a touch of reality with his classic, "What's up, scared kid?" At last, we get a view of Professor Xavier's old quarters where a photograph of the inaugural X-Men crew is present, including the esteemed professor himself, Iceman, Cyclops, Jean Grey as Marvel Girl, Warren Worf III as Angel, and the Beast. A striking homage to the first X-Men team. Now let's shift our focus onto Val Cooper, who operates within the United States government alongside the United Nations. She worked hand in hand with Professor Xavier in order to aid mutants. Val actually started as a special advisor on national security, concentrating on issues related to metahumans. Interestingly, in this specific scene, Val gets introduced while being on a treadmill, reminiscent of how they introduced the president in the first episode of the X-Men animated series. Quite an intriguing parallel here. Val Cooper is then notified that someone is supplying Sentinel technology to these aggressive factions. The dialogue is largely centered around Boulevard Trask, the creator of the Sentinels, and Master Mold, a massive robot which doubles as a supercomputer. Val mentions that Trask is missing, but they destroyed his only factory. Scott, frustrated, suggests that she should investigate the possibility of Trask built another factory after finishing his army. Val points out that she asked the UN Council for cooperation with the X-Men, given her friendship with Charles, suggesting that Scott should also trust her. Soon after, we find out that Scott is shaken because they received Professor Xavier's death certificate. Is he dead? I believe he'll show up at the end of the first season. He then expressed to Scott his desire to leave the X-Men to raise his children in a quieter environment. This conversation is interrupted by a basketball that breaks the window, the result of a Wolverine prank that scared Roberto. On the basketball court, Scott takes on the role of a leader. Given Jim's history with members of the first X-Men team and his closeness, Scott's relationship with Professor Xavier makes sense, though it does create tension, especially with Wolverine, who's always had a complicated relationship with Scott. The X-Men also deal with the complex love triangle between Scott, Jean, and Wolverine. Wolverine, who has feelings for Jean, is hesitant to follow Scott's orders, but she eventually gives in to his request. Wolverine also expresses her displeasure with Scott taking over as leader in Professor Xavier's absence. The relationships between the characters are further explored in a scene at the club, where Morph transforms into Jean Grey, reflecting on her unrequited love situation while watching Jean with Scott. Wolverine, who apparently knows of Jean and Scott's plans to leave the team, expresses her frustration. The team, including Storm and Bishop, visits Henry Peter Gyrick, who was responsible for the attack on Professor Xavier while he was working in the Department of Defense. They try to get information on who's providing Sentinel technology to the Friends of Humanity. Gyrick refuses to cooperate, maintaining his belief in the need to eradicate mutants. Scott confronts Gyrick, unlike Professor Xavier, who would have talked more, and allows Jean to use her powers to enter his mind and seek information. In this attempt, Jim has a premonition involving Master Mold, indicating Trask may be planning something major. The team then mobilizes to investigate. Jubilee, Sunspot, and Jim remain together at the X-Mansion. During the flight to the Sahara Desert, friction between Scott and Wolverine persists. Suddenly, they're attacked by sentry bots. The ensuing battle features some of the series' best animation and action scenes. Cyclops manages to destroy a sentry, and the team works together to survive the jet's explosion. The final scene shows Cyclops in free fall, using his lightning ability to slow his descent and land safely, reaffirming his position as interim leader with the iconic words, "To me, my X-Men." It reminded me of Cyclops' power in the game X-Men vs. Street Fighter, good old arcade days. If you've played this game, comment below. Now, the X-Men, with Cyclops at the helm, take full control. We also noticed that Storm went to get Gambit. They came across Trask, still determined to exterminate all mutants. We realize they're in the middle of a veritable graveyard of Sentinels, and to the tune of the classic X-Men theme song, each one shows off their skills. Rogue, with her strength and invulnerability, puts on a show by dismantling the Sentinels. Gambit, with his ability to manipulate kinetic energy, uses his cards as potent weapons. We see Wolverine in action, his adamantium claws tearing through a Sentinel, and Beast, combining strength and intellect, can even control one of them. Bishop and Gambit form an effective duo, with Bishop absorbing and redirecting energy into attacks against them. At one point, a Sentinel throws Wolverine far away, interrupting Beast's fight. The X-Men regroup, but notice the absence of Storm. Then Cyclops calls out to her and she appears, highlighting how she is an Omega level mutant, a ranking for the most powerful. Storm turns the sand into glass with lightning, creating a destructive spectacle against the remaining Sentinels. This scene is grand, with a song chosen especially for it. When Master Mold enters the picture, Wolverine and Gambit combine forces for a final offensive. A representative of the United Nations, Cooper, arrives to deal with Trask and the wreckage. She has a meaningful conversation with Cyclops, evidencing her good work in leadership. At the same time, Sunspot decides to reveal his powers to Jubilee, indicating a possible bond between them. The scene ends on the basketball court, with the team acknowledging Cyclops as the leader. Cyclops and Jean's farewell is interrupted by the surprise arrival of Magneto, who reveals Xavier's will, having inherited everything, including the mansion and the X-Men themselves. Which is weird, since they're people, right? And leadership is not inherited, it is earned. True or not? This was the first episode of X-Men 97. Share your thoughts and theories about the next chapters in the comments. If you liked the video, please like, share, and subscribe. Indications of the next videos are showing up here right now, making perfect sense for you to watch them. I'll see you guys in the next video. See you later.